My name is Julie. In this particular series, we've been looking at the integration setup and configuration for a background check vendor. In this video, we'll finish the topic off by looking at the inbound scenario. More specifically, if we look at our either option 1 or option 2, we're looking at the asynchronous updates of the information coming from the background check vendor endpoint system into SuccessFactors to update the candidate profiles. So for setting up our inbound messages for our background check, we're going to be using Postman to send some queries back and forth. But the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that we have all our permissions and roles set up. So because we're using the APIs, we want to use that new API user that we set up. So we set up a new user called SF API 2. And we assigned that user the role of SF API. So if we go into that role and we look at the permissions, we want to look at under the Manage Integration Tools. We just want to make sure that we have Allow Admin to access OData API through basic authentication. So we're going to be using that for our Postman queries. Obviously, in productive use, you would want to use something like OAuth 2, but for our just testing here, we're going to go ahead and use basic authentication. So as long as we have that turned on, then we can use that for our Postman queries using that SF API 2 user. And then the next thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our recruiting vendor is actually mapped as well. So if we go into our managed data and we search for external vendor, we see that we have our mythical vendor that we've set to the integration type of background check. So that's the vendor that we're going to send our messages back and forth using. Okay, so let's go ahead on to Postman. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and set up basic authentication, and my user is going to be my SF API 2. That's my special API user that I set up and assigned all those permissions and roles to, and then my company name. And then the password is whatever the password was that we set up when we set up that user. So we're going to use this basic authentication for all of our Postman queries. And the first query that we're going to do is a GET. So we are the vendor who has received an order from SuccessFactors and wants to assign an order number on the vendor side to that request. So basically, we're going to query into the SuccessFactors job application background check request table and see whether there is a legitimate order there. So in my case, it's request ID 368. I think in the documentation, if you're looking at it, it says request equal to 140. So you just want to make sure that you're going to put in whatever your request number was that you sent initially. So if we run that, it's actually going to go out and tell me that there is indeed a request ID number 368. The vendor order number is mythical. That was our company. And today's date with some kind of a unique identifier on it. And so we can see that the request was received. The order status is okay. The only two parameters we have here are either okay or error. The application ID, this is my candidate application that we're working with. So we're always looking at application ID 3148. So that's one particular applicant. And you can put in whatever you want here for the response detail. I just put in whatever. My response code's 200, saying that it's actually indeed did go through and find the request. And it gave me some information about that request. So all I'm doing is checking that the order status was there, and I'm providing that particular request with a vendor order number. And then that's how I'm going to be able to write information back to that same status next time. So if this were option 1 and the recruiter had initiated the background check through the UI, that would send the order request to the vendor. The vendor is sending back the order request number so that we have now those two pieces connected for being able to exchange information. And for our next query, if we take a look at an order request that was sent through the intelligence services through the integration center, then we're actually going to have a post from the vendor that's going to create a record or update a record in the job request. So remember, in option 2, we had the ability to bulk order background checks. So we want to make sure that a response is sent back for each candidate within that bulk order, so that they each have their individual request ID, application ID combination. So in this case, we can do it. We're telling it that we're looking at the background check request table again, and we're sending back the information on the order number and the ID and the response detail. And so again, if we send this message, we can see that the order status is set to OK, and it's been updated successfully for that particular request ID and that particular application ID. So the next thing we might want to look at, so now that we know that our order status has been is OK, we might want to actually retrieve some of the candidate information. So we would go back to using a get, and here we can actually put in all the different parameters. Or if I go into parameters here, I can put in filters for a particular request and do a $ select for all the different fields that I want to bring back the information. So let's send that. And here I can see all of the different metadata information. Here's my application ID of 3148, happens to belong to Jason Ali, and here's his information that we're bringing back. And actually we have various language codes here, so we have multiple pieces of information that are in the different languages. So here I'm able to bring back the metadata information about that particular candidate or that particular application ID. Okay, so our previous queries were regarding the check order status request. And now we want to look at the results table. So I, as the vendor who have the third-party information on this particular candidate, want to post those results or upsert those results, either update or insert a new record for that candidate as I receive that information. Remember, this is asynchronous, so I'm going to receive information over time depending on how many steps or stages or different queries I need to run. So here I want to, instead of using the check request table, now I'm looking at the check background check result table. And I'm going to post, and I can just post in with my order number and some kind of a status. So let's say it's in process, and my message is the driver's license check came back clean. As long as I have this final step set to false, then that means I'm still collecting information for this candidate, and so I'm not updating. I'm not showing that it's complete yet, so it's just going to show as in process. So if I go ahead and send that, I've sent this information, and if I go in and take a look at my candidate and refresh, I should see that the background check for Jason Ali is in status, or the status is in progress. So now if I go back to my Postman query, and this time I say that this is the last message I'm going to send back. I'm going to make it complete. I'm going to set this to true, and I'm going to provide you with a report URL so that you can actually pull up and see all the information about this candidate from the vendor. I can go ahead and send that. And so now if I go back into the UI and I refresh, and I look at Jason again, I see now that the background check is complete, and I have a view report, and that'll be the URL that you put in your query. So in my particular case, I just went out to our YouTube channel for the HANA Academy, but you can see that you can provide an end report for the recruiter to be able to review all of the different background checks that you've run for this particular candidate. So that's how you send your messages back to SuccessFactors with the information on the background checks. And if you're looking at the implementation guide, there are several different examples of different types of stages or messages that you could send back and forth that you can use in your Postman queries. So that should give you a little bit of information on how to set up the inbound messages using those various APIs and the parameters or filters for them. And that completes our series on the background check integration scenario. I hope it was helpful.